Okay, today's September 23rd. This demo is translating color objects into value. So as you see up here, we have a setup that we have a white object and then we have some colored objects surrounding it. The white is there so that you can compare the value of these colored objects compared to something that's white. Remember I said that value is always relative to what it's next to. So it's easier to sort of see this. I'm going to put this up on the screen so you can see it that way. This is sort of what we're after. And it's similar to the setup that I've got here. You'll notice that these objects, and because of the shape, you can probably figure out what they are. These, pear and apple and probably an orange here, but each of them, they have different colors, but sometimes the challenge is to see the actual value of what that color is. And remember what we mentioned is when we're turning form into representational painting, value is maybe more important than color, right? So I'm going to dispense today from the value scale. You've already done that. You kind of got the idea. But what I'm going to show you that's new today is how to start on the whiteboard. And I'm going to show you a sort of different way to start a painting by starting right on your whiteboard, black and white paint. All right. So if you're taking notes, the thing I'm going to dip my brush in first today is it's going to be black paint and Gamsol.
And what?
Remember what your Gamsol is?
Or medium?
Nope.
What?
Your Gamsol is your cleaner.
Okay.
And the reason why is because you're going to sort of brush this in and it's going to dry. The Gamsol isn't really a medium. It's a distillate. It's a mineral spirit, basically. But because of that, it breaks the paint down. So we don't want to use it as a medium when we start using thick paint. But to lay in a painting, you can use it that way. And the first thing I do is I tone my board. So I got it a little wet. I got my brush a little wet. I'm just going to go up here into the black paint. I'm not getting into the white yet. And I shouldn't have done what I just did. Don't do that.
Sorry, will you say that again? Why are you using the Gamsol? To really thin it out, extra thin?
Yeah, you'll see I'm using sort of things. I'm using sort of a wash. Can somebody bring me that gray tape that's over on the desk over there? Thanks. One thing I was going to do is I was going to take the back of this. Thank you. So what I did just now is I did something similar, or I made my board to something similar to what you guys had last week, what you started with, but it's a little bit wet. But this is Gamsol, and you notice that I just wipe it out, and that is really light. Just keep it really light. But what I did is I just knocked out the white. Now, any ideas or thoughts why it's good to just kind of get rid of that pure white of the board?
You want your whites and your highlights to stand up top.
Yeah, that's very good. Good. Any other thoughts? Very good. Any other ideas?
You need some sort of base to judge your shadows.
Yeah, you're right on the right key. You got to have a base to judge your shadows. And most of what I'm painting up here is far from white. So I'm already 20% of the way there by what I just did, right? Right? I'm closer to the values of these things I see. The only white I see up there maybe be a highlight. This isn't even pure white. On the top of that, I don't know if you can see my laser pointer on the video. But the top of that hexagon shape, this isn't even pure white. Because the pure white may be like a highlight up here or maybe something on here. So, and it's easier to judge your value relationships. Now, we're going to let go of temperature for 1 week. We're just going to do this without all the other stuff. All we're after again is just value. Shape and value, right? Maybe some edges, and we do want to talk about, you're always looking at composition. You have an opportunity now for something to compose up here. So get your little window out. I'm just making one with my 2 fingers. And I make it about the same size as my board. And I'm looking through this. And I may not take in all of those objects. And some of them might be going off. So that's all right. Matter of fact, I'm going to go like that. I just decided I like that what I'm seeing. So you can do this a couple of different ways. You can sort of place your shapes. Now what am I doing first again? Am I drawing?
Placement.
Correct. I'm not drawing, even though I am, but if you think about drawing, you're going to get too worried about it. I'm just placing these and very abruptly, and just because I just want to quickly get it down to see, okay, is that what I'm thinking? Yeah, that's good. If it's not, the cool thing is you can just sort of, with that base you put down, you can just sort of erase it out. You might have a little after image, that's not a problem. Maybe I want to move it just a little bit over this way, and then this object is sort of overlapping a little bit more. I see a little bit of this. Now if you have something going off, make sure it's going off. Don't draw an object like that. Why? What did I just do? I created this tangent point, and it's kind of a way that will attract your eye over there, and you don't really want that. And unless you want that, maybe you decide that later. But for now, we're trying to stay away from the tangents. There's a couple other things, if you're taking notes, that's happening now with design. There's overlap. If you've ever taken a design class, there's overlap. That creates dimension too. And so the overlap is nice. This object here is overlapping this hexagon shape. And I like that. So
I have a question on, why did you say that's not a tangent going off without being painted? That half, it just came to my mind.
this
Yes.
is not a tangent because you're not allowing the edge of the object to line up with the edge of your painting. It just goes off as if it were to get cut off like a photograph would cut it off. It's natural. It's more natural. I can't fit that all on there. So I'll see maybe a half of it, or maybe a 2/3 or something. I probably wouldn't, if I only saw that much of it, I would probably just leave it out. Okay, you want to see at least enough of it so that,
Well,
and I'm
I've
looking
seen
at
a tree in a painting, and it was only half the tree, and I thought, is that a tangent? Because I'm trying to figure things out in my head.
only if the edge of the tree is lining up with the edge of your canvas. That's tangent. Okay? If the tree's going off like half, and it's just kind of coming in, that's not a
That's
tangent.
Okay, thanks.
Generally, the
Appreciate it.
tangents are like the edge of the objects lining up with the edge of your... And I see a lot of times students will take the objects here and have them sitting right on the edge of the bottom, and that's not good either. That's another tangent. And we talk about visual gravity. That feels like it'll just sort of fall out of the picture. And so I'm still using this mixture that I kind of mixed up with just a little bit of my Gamsol, and it's kind of loose, it's kind of a little wet, it's getting a little drier, but I'm going to start, I got this placement in now. I'm going to start putting in the values that I see. And I'll show you how I do it in a real kind of simplified way first, and then we can break things up. But again, what I'm doing here is it's kind of a, it's just kind of a real thin, kind of a wash. It's not wet, it's not really wet, but it's not really dry either. It's a little bit thinner than if you were to mix with your medium. The reason why I'm doing this again is because with the Gamsol, this will set up and dry quicker so that you could go in with the lighter colors and thicker paint later where it won't be so problematic to mix in there if it's too wet. This is already dry. See what I put down? That's already dry. Because the Gamsol evaporates quickly. It's like a mineral spirit. All right, so what we could do next is what we know, we look for the darkest dark and the lightest light. I got my placement in, darkest dark, lightest light. Look up there, I'm just going to look. I think it's down here underneath this object, the apple here. The lightest light is probably, oh, let's see. And I'm just going to get some white paint out just to see. And it's good just to get pure white paint out and see what it looks like on your tone. Maybe the whitest white is somewhere up there, right along the edge of that. There's a little bit of a highlight right along that edge. Okay, so I'm going to keep that. The darkest dark is probably not pure black, by the way. It's just probably a little bit of a value that's not quite black. So let's go ahead with this, this mixture. Now, I can see already, if I squint down, I can see that there are different values up there. You can see that, can't you? What's the darkest value object up there?
Apple.
Yeah, the red apple. And it's easy. You can see that, right? There's not a problem with that. It might get a little more challenging when you start to see the other objects that are sort of closer together. Like, say, that orange or the grapefruit, whatever you want to call it, and this, I didn't put back here, but this other yellow apple back here, that might be very close. But I'm going to just go for what I think is pretty obvious. And notice that I'm just going for the whole thing. And I'm not worried about the actual shape of the apple yet. Remember, you can shape things as you go with the painting. I could even, sometimes I'll even keep things in sort of a squarish shape like this, just to know I'm placing it. I've got the height versus the width appears to be about equal is what I'm seeing up there. You can visualize that. And remember, we're always making our best guess. Let me show you how to do one thing here at this point that's a drawing skill that will help immensely now that we start looking at objects compared to each other. And this has a little bit more to do with drawing. But when I start to get these things placed, I can see that this is just a little darker. This is just a little darker than the apple, not by much. And this shape over here is actually a little lighter. And I've got some cast shadows going here. And you notice how I'm putting these in. I'm just scrubbing them in. I'm not at this stage of the game. I'm not going in here and going, very carefully trying to find those shapes because you're gonna go over them anyway. Just a general area where I see all that shadow going on, and I'm trying to also see the differences in the values. Now, the value that I put down to cover up my white can, again, like we did a couple weeks ago, can be a substitute player maybe for some of these things. Probably this section right here. You can see up there, that section right there, that's probably that same as this. So I'm going to leave that for now. Maybe where it starts to turn here, I'm going to just darken that up a little bit. And I can see that this actually goes up a little bit higher. I'll remind myself that's the top of it there. You notice that I'm using my rag. It's like kind of wiping out, just like you did the first week. If you kind of wipe out some things as well. I'm using sort of a big brush. It's like a number 10 or 12. I'm not using one of these to kind of You know, if I get one of these, I'll be here all day filling in the apple, and then I'll be out of time, right? So use the right tool for the job. I always go big brushes at the first of the painting. Big and loose. Just throw it in there. We're not you're not getting too much in your head yet. Just what you see. Just what you see, try to get the placement. Okay. Now what I wanted to show you is that measuring. So I can make a best guess, let's say that hexagon shape up there, or the apple here. You know, I see that this hexagon shape has a certain height to it, right? And it has a certain width to it. Well, is my width and my height the same as up there? How do I check that? Well, there's a way that we can check that by measuring. And I'll go through this, and then I'll probably help some of you individually later. If you haven't had this before, it takes a couple of times to get used to it. But let me just go through it. So I make my best guess. This is what my eye saw. And it looks pretty close, right? I'm just guessing. Basically everything we do is a guess anyway. So I'm going to measure. And I always go for the smaller length and to see how many of that length goes into that. But I've got to check it up there on that one. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold, I don't know if the video can pick this up, but I'm going to hold my arm out and I lock my elbow, because if I go back and forth, that changes the perspective of how this might get bigger or smaller. But you notice that I'm right-handed, so I close my left eye, and I'm holding this just flat, like a flat piece of glass in front of me, and I'm holding that where my thumb, with my elbow locked, is lined up with the right edge of this, and the tip of my is lined up. Let's see if I can do it. It's not really actually, but see there. I'm going to do it for the video so you guys can see. It's not actually what I'm doing here, but can you see how this end of the brush is lined up with the other side? Right? Can you see that?
Yes.
Then I still have my elbow locked, and I turn it, and I go to the bottom. Well, everything's backwards. And then I turn it, and I go, oh, how many of those go into the height? One, and kind of like a fourth, right? Did you see how that happened? But that's going to be different on the video, because that's way squished because of the screen. So I'm going to do it up here now. I'm going to go, so there's the width, and then there's the height, and then I kind of make this little bit of a mark that I visually see, and then I move my thumb up, and it is like 1.5. So then I know that 1.5 of these should be the same length as that. So I check my drawing. So I go, there's that one, and I just go right on there. Then I know that if I go from here, and I make a mark, and I go up, and see it's a little higher than 1.5. It's approximate. I mean, being approximate. So what does that say that my drawing is too much of versus that one?
Too tall.
It's too tall. Because if it were down here, then it would be the 1.5, right? Right now it's almost 2. So already I can tell that mine is too tall. Does that make sense to you guys? That's how you measure. And you can do it with any objects. You can do it with your apple. You can see what's the width of this to that. And I do it up there on the apple, right? I go, what's the width of the apple? That to that. And I always go with the more narrow width. And I see how many of those go into the height. And then I check mine to see if it's the same. Width into the height. And that's pretty close. It's a little bit tall, actually.
And you can compare objects to one another.
And you can compare objects to one another. Absolutely. You compare objects. Once you have your first object measured in proportion, then you can compare anything to that object because you know it's correct, right? This is a great tool. That's why you see people that are drawing, they're always going like this. That's what they're doing. They're measuring, or they're finding angles. Okay, good. I could explain that more when you have questions when you're actually painting. I want to get on with go on now. So I'm finding the values now, and I'm making my best guess. And I know that this is the darkest object up there. I know that this is a little darker. It's not quite as dark. I know that the the light side of that is a little lighter. It's probably close to the value that's already down here. And the cast shadows, I can see that these cast shadows, the cast shadow on the apple is actually a little lighter than the apple. The cast shadow on this appears, on this orange or this other shape, appears to be a little darker than this, because the shadow side on this is actually lighter than this whole area of the apple. Now the apple does have a shadow side to it. But right now I'm just getting, what I see mainly, and that's the whole object. But if I were to divide that shadow, I can see that it goes down here. Now, one of the challenges you guys will have is to find coarse shadows on these objects. So sometimes you'll have to just make sort of a guess. But can you see the light and the dark shadow of the apple? How far is the light compared to the dark? How many steps is that on your value scale? 1, 2, 3, from that to that.
Yes, I would say 2.
It's maybe a 1 step, maybe a half a step. What I'm saying is very subtle. What I see up here, the light side of that apple. Now, how about the step between this and this?
I can't see the same thing you're saying. So
Yeah, if you're looking at that, if you're looking at the value of the grapefruit there on the left, that value's changed. Can you see how that value changed? And there's that's almost like our sphere. You can see right there the core shadow. And so the light area is a little more different than the dark area. Here, because the nature of the apple, and another word I'm going to introduce now here is called local color. Local color, which is the actual color of an object when it's not in any extreme light or dark. And that's why a lot of times we'll talk more about the halftone. The halftone is where mostly the local color of the object is happening, because that's kind of between the light and the dark. But because the local color of the apple is inherently dark, that red color is sort of dark, right? The light side of that dark versus the dark side of the dark is not that different. Whereas a white thing, it's quite dramatic, you see. You can see that. All right, so let's just keep going. I'm going to see if I can talk a little less now and just start painting. You guys can watch. Probably won't happen. I'll just keep talking anyway. I'm sure I'll explain some things. All right. Okay. Background. I'm still using just a little bit of my Gamsol. My background is a lot darker than what my board is showing me. What was the what?
You haven't used any medium yet?
No. And you just got to be really careful not to have this wet. It's still kind of dry. This paint is very thin. It's sort of dry. Boy, that changed everything, didn't it? That made that appear a lot lighter. That doesn't appear so dark anymore. That changed how this looks. And it's actually closer to what I'm seeing up there. A lot closer all of a sudden. So remember, you got to sort of think Zen. What's the empty space? It's just as important, if not more. And I try to capture that right at the first. Because it's the things that are the most different than what I'm seeing on my board. All right, so I've got everything set up. I've got my values somewhat in the right place. The light areas, now I've got to get, I should say for the darks, but on the light areas now I'm going to go in with, I'm going to start mixing up some of the white paint. And this is where I'm going to start using a little more medium. All right. Because now when I start mixing in a little bit of my, using the white paint, I'm going to use a little more of I'm going to use some more medium, but not a whole lot. I'm going to use this brush. Okay, how light is that light side? I've got to Remember, when you're mixing things up, what it looks like here may look different than what it looks there. Wow, look at that. Look how dark this appears, and look how light that appears.
Your
And my
medium was
paint's
what?
really wet. I got too much medium in there.
Your medium was what?
My medium?
Yeah.
Just my liquid, just whatever you
Just
guys
the
have for the liquid for your, you know.
Okay.
So that's the two things I'm using. I started with my Gamsol, and
Is turpentine different than Gamsol?
turpentine is the same idea as Gamsol, but it's the thing with Gamsol is it's a synthetic kind of a turpentine that's made, and it doesn't have the smell. So, but it's still a toxic. But the Gamsol, as they say, it's not as toxic. They say that the evaporation rate is a little more quicker, and anyway, anyway, yes, the turpentine would be, so you could use turpentine to wash in the painting, as I say, but again, don't get it too wet. Already I got too much medium in here. I'm too wet I'm just too wet up here. So I'm just going to wipe it all off. And sometimes you have to just be willing to just get rid of what's not working on your board. And so I'm just going to wipe that off. You have another towel? Thanks. Thank you. That's really nice to have you do that. All right, I'm going to go into some paint here and just a tiny bit of medium. See, when I mix medium with my paint, I'm actually using hardly any medium now. And I've got to get, I'm thinking that the lightest, I'm just going to go for what I see, okay? I'm painting what I see. I see that this is a lot lighter at the moment, so I know I can put that in. See what kind of brush I'm using? This is my 1 inch. That's a great brush for big areas. Isn't that nice? I can just like, where sometimes you'll get in here and you'll go like this, and then half an hour later you've got it all covered up really nicely. Plus, I think this looks cool. It's fresh. There's a little piece of light coming around there. And now I can really see what that cast shadow is doing. It's relating now to what this value is closer to up there. And back here, it's a little grayer. So that's still the tabletop back there, but it's a little grayer. This is the lighter area, but that's not pure white, right? Just to remind you, there's pure white. I don't know if that can show up. It's quite a bit lighter. I can see that the top of this, now I know there's all this hexagony stuff going on up there, but I'm not worried about it right now. I can go, just like sculpture, right? I can go back and it needs to be lighter than that. Sometimes when you don't want to keep putting stuff, if you know it needs to be different, take your knife, just scrape it off, and then get the correct value up there. I like working with this brush because it reminds me that I'm just laying stuff in, and it doesn't get me so worried about getting everything so perfect. I just want to lay that plane in, and then I can come in later and make sure those shapes are happening. Now, on this top, from where I'm sitting, it appears to be a little lighter than here, which makes sense because where's the light source coming from? It's coming from above down, so this would be lighter. This would be just a hint. Not by much. And so I'm just stepping it down a little bit. Now again, this white object's going to help us because this white object is helping us to relate these other objects and their value, what's going on. And now I see that those two are fairly similar. So I'm going to lighten this one up just a little bit more. I think if I get a little lighter paint, maybe another swipe will make that a little lighter than I want. That's good. Now can you see, only until now I could see how that first tone I put down is relating, right? There's no way I could say, well, yeah, that could be that or that or that. I can only see it what it's compared to this, compared to that, and now it looks pretty much what I need for that. This is looking pretty good still for that value on the lights. Now as I look at these other objects, there's something kind of cool happening on this one in the back. See a little bit of a, I try to set this up so you get some interesting things with these, some cast shadows that we're getting a cast shadow on a couple of the items there. So the light side of this apple back here, probably too light, but I want to show how there's a cast shadow. So this is the cast shadow, and it was pretty close to what I already had there, so I don't really need to paint over top of it. There's the cast shadow. Cast shadows have sharp edges or soft fuzzy edges? Cast shadows.
What's the answer?
Well, I should have asked the question a little more appropriately. Compared to core shadows. Compared to core shadows. What are cast shadows? That's a little better way to ask it, so that, because it is a hard question. And in subtle ways, there is sharp and soft edges, but compared to the core shadow, the cast shadow edges are sharper. And you can see that up there. You can see the cast shadow on this apple back here. So don't get confused with cast shadows that are happening on another form from another object with core shadows, and the way you treat the edge of it and the form of how it goes around, depending on where they're at, will help you, because right here is actually part of the core shadow, and right here is part of the cast shadow. For you guys that are right here around where I'm at, and I'm going to point it out with my laser pointer, can you see how this part of the shadow here, which is casting the shadow from this hexagon object, can you see how that's sharp and this is soft right there? Can you see it? Hard, or a little darker, and soft. That's the core shadow of this object. This is the cast shadow. It just happens to be on the same object. Sometimes that happens, sometimes it doesn't. This comes over here a little bit more with the light. So there's going to be a little bit of that. All right, so that feels pretty good for that light and dark. I'm just comparing these things. This object here, this is a little lighter than what I'm showing. But again, on this onion, or this thing on the right of the hexagon, I can tell that this value is not as light as that value, right? I'm just comparing. It's just a comparison game, and you can compare what's lighter or darker, and you get it close. It's not going to be perfect, but you can get it close. Down here I see some of the cast shadow of that, and it kind of touches this hexagon thing, and it goes off the page. I want to take this brush again, and I'm brushing this down here. That sort of helps complete that cast shadow coming this way. So we see some things happening. Now I want you to notice how the whole thing feels a bit rough, right? It's kind of raw. It's absolutely good at this stage. There's nothing wrong with that. I think a lot of problems with painting, and especially for beginners, is they get a little anxious about the fact that it looks rough and it looks raw, and sometimes we call it sort of the ugly stage. And this is the process. This is where we're at. And it's fine, because remember, if you get going too fast and you get into your details too fast, what will happen? What's that?
You're just going to have to redo them anyway because it's wrong.
Yeah, so we're trying to keep things right in a real simple, fundamental way with the big shapes. Okay, so I'm dividing the lights, found this value, so I'm just finding the values of all these things. I'm comparing it to this thing here, and I'm comparing it to the ground here, what the background is. You can see this. This is all sort of what you guys have done. So let me just take you a few other steps, and then we'll let you loose on this for today. Oh, we're doing great with time. Wow. You guys are going to do well. Let me show you how I would mix. Now this isn't quite there. This is just a little piece that was reminding me that there's the light side and the dark side. This isn't quite where the core shadow is. The core shadow is actually more right here. And so I'm going to take a little bit of this lighter value, and I can tell now, if you guys are looking now, this to this, what's lighter in value, the light side of this or the light side of this? They're really close. This is where it's going to be a little challenging to see the two colors and to decide which one's darker or lighter in value. You guys are looking at the actual setup. Can you see? Do you think they're more the same or are they different?
Maybe the orange is a little darker.
Yeah, that's what I'm seeing. It's really small difference though, right? So that's a little lighter, and plus this may be appearing a little lighter because it's next to this black, or I should say this darker background, where this right here, this area here, this part is here a little bit too, but still. So I'm dividing the light and dark of this object. And again, my paint is still pretty thin. I've got a little more paint. I don't try to mix much medium at all with it. And so you can see how it's starting to happen here. All right, there's some highlights on these objects. Now, on the apple, gosh, that looks pretty bright. The apple's a little shiny. The apple's kind of shiny, so it will be reflecting a little bit with the highlight of the actual light source. That actual light source is showing up here. But it's not going to be pure white. It's definitely not pure white. If I went up there and touched that with a piece of white paint, you would see there's a little bit of a highlight over here. It's kind of subtle. It's going to, these will probably get pushed out of there later anyway. I don't really see one over here. Since I'm kind of working with the highlights, I see that this edge right here seems to be quite light. And I kind of beefed my paint up right there. It's kind of thick. Get that light. Oh, I just noticed something. I went up too high. I got excited with that big brush. So if that's the case, scrape this out. Because I need to lower this. I can see the distance from here to here is not clear up to there, so I'm going to scrape that out. Just like that. Don't worry about messing things up because you're going to bring it back anyway. And then since this was the base color, I'm going to see if I can wipe it back. This is the way you just can arrange things. That's what's great about this medium. Now that's more like it, and
Does that mean you need to make that
Wider.
wider?
yeah, I'm just noticing that. Good eye. So, but I see how it comes into the apple here, but I notice that this base is too small from what I'm seeing up there. So I could push this way. I don't want to do that. So in other words, I would need to really move my apple this direction, which I will. And then I'm going to move, and I want to show this to you because a lot of times, and I still have space over here, so I'm not too close to the edge. I'm going to move this, and then I can move and make this a little wider, and then it will line up where it needs to be. I'm just going to race it out because kind of back to my tone. See how I'm keeping the tone that I started with? It was just a lighter gray. Now that's a little closer. A little bit more. So you can readjust the drawing. This is what I want to show you with oil paint. It's not a big deal to readjust the drawing or the placement. And then I can wipe out this area here where I had the other ghost image of this apple. And I can complete this back in here. But you see, if I would have had my painting almost done and I found all those things and I'm like, oh my gosh, everything's wrong. What's the likelihood of me moving everything when all the details are laid in, right? How long did that take me to make that adjustment?
3 minutes.
If that, maybe a couple. And now I feel really good. That feels so much better, you guys, than later on when you get the details in too soon and you look at it and go, oh, crap. And then that's where you go, I just don't want to do this anymore. I knew I wasn't a good oil painter. I knew I got in the wrong class. I got to get out. Huh?
No.
Crazy. Just take it step at a time. Still, I still like it, and it is where it needs to be. So that is now where it needs to be. I can make myself see that a little more. This is changing. Now, let me show you with some shape things now. Because on this hexagon, it's a little challenging to make those angles up here. Like we got this angle like this, and then we have an angle that's coming back like this. And I've just got some dark paint. Now see, I'm cutting into it. Remember that first initial swipe I made with my big inch brush? Now I can come back and cut into it like sculpture and just sort of guess. And here's another way to find angles. Just imagine in front of you as a piece of glass that's flat with it's perpendicular to your eyesight. And you've got your brush up here and you're holding it out, like here. And I can hold my brush over top of anything up there that's sort of an angle. So like this angle here, what is that angle? I can make my best guess and say, well, it kind of appears to be going like that, and then there's the corner of it here. So I always make my best guess. And just so we can see what's going on, let me put the back up here, back to that point, the light color. So that angle there. But I can check it. So I come up here pretending I'm on a flat glass. Now you don't want to poke your brush in like that, even though it's like going in perspective, because you can't really bring it down to check your angles. So you have to keep it flat. Every angle up there you can find as if you're thinking that you're a clock. That's about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, right? Closer to maybe 2:13 or whatever. Is that? I check that angle and I hold it. I hold it as still as I can. And then I bring it down and line it up with what my guess was. And my guess was very close. Check it again, the old carpenter's rule. Measure twice, cut once. Check it again. Be willing to hold it still. And don't go like this. Don't go like that. No. Oh yeah, it's not out. But you got to really be willing to hold it still and then lay it over top. And I'm seeing that angle pretty well. If it wasn't lining up, then I can tell which way it needs to go. And you're going to draw this thing in perspective without us talking too much about perspective. You can do perspective quite a bit with just sighting. We call it sighting with looking for angles. Right? And there's that, and then there's the back of this. So now I'm sort of cleaning things up a little bit. You can see how the hexagon aspect of this is starting to happen. And now this angle is a little bit more dramatic down here. I know that's too dark. I'll get rid of it. So I'm giving you some drawing tools also today with this. All right, so that's good for now. I want to get back to this. I'm finding the light side of this. So what are all the light logic areas that we're looking for. Remember the first day we did the sphere. What are all the areas? We got light side, dark side, core shadow. What else are we looking for here?
Reflected light.
Reflected light. So can you guys see reflected light in these objects now? It's going to be a little more challenging because they're color.
And the apple is really easy to see.
Yeah, you can see, well, there's a couple of things going on in the apple. The apple's so shiny that you're actually seeing an actual reflection of this tabletop. You could put that in. It's a real subtle thing. But there also is a little bit of reflected light coming up. But the reflected light, again, is just light coming up to the object, where the reflection, because this object is a little shiny, you'll see some of that coming up. They're two different things. You can really see it on this one here. Can you see the reflected light going up there?
Yeah.
Without a reflection. This is not shiny, so you can see that. So you can see that there's a reflected light coming up into here. And again, we're not worried about warm or cool because we're looking at colors. We're going to talk about that next week when we get into the color discussion. Next week, we're going to start talking about color. Then we're going to really be taking off. So I put that reflected light up there. Okay, how about the core shadows? Can you see the core shadow in the apple? I can see the core shadow because I'm going to put a little bit of that value that I see of the reflection of the apple is a little bit, but I have to say this is very subtle. This is a very subtle transition right here. And a lot of the dark of that apple I see right there, and as a matter of fact, maybe the darkest point is probably right there. Really dark. I can shape this a little bit here now. It's got these little bumps. Kind of cool. Now I'm at a point where maybe I could shape things a little more. Right? And
Wow.
hmm?
It's crazy how it can come alive with like one stroke.
That's the funny thing about this painting business. That's why you have to be patient. I have a lot of students that throw up their hands near the end of the painting session and they're like, I knew I couldn't do it. It's just really crappy. And then I'll come by and they don't realize, because they just haven't had enough experience to realize that they're so close. It's just a few brush strokes and they're like, oh, there it is. Right? So don't throw it off too quickly. This cast shadow comes out a little more because I did move it. I'm trying to get some dark in here, and then this is all space down here that's in sort of a cast shadow area. Make it a little darker. And go down and you notice that I'm sort of bringing this whole thing up together. I'm not working on one object. I work on a little bit here, then I move over to here. Now, why do I do that? Why do I bring the whole thing up together and not spend so much time on one area too long? What's the problem with that if I do that?
Because it's all relative to each other.
There you go. You got it.
What was it that you said?
Tell it again.
Oh, it's all relative to each other.
Oh, yes.
Because if I work on this forever and I get all this relating and stuff, then I go over here and it's like, oh, it's not right. You know, so you can see everything. This is important to know what that value is, even to see what that one is way over here, especially here and there and there. And this one's important to know what that is. And so I got to kind of bring it all up together. And so just don't, all you need to remember is don't work on one area too long. Okay, here's a core shadow right here. Sometimes I put the core shadows in just a little darker. And do you see how this just started to turn all of a sudden? Man, that's what's cool to see this, the kind of the magic. And what's interesting is, I don't know if the camera's picking this up. It is a little bit, but you see what I had underneath there? It just so happened, a little serendipity here, it just so happened that that's perfect for my what? What is that right there?
Midtones.
Midtone, very good. Now I want you guys to look at this. Since we're looking at this, we're going to talk more about this in color. But the midtones are going to be really important when we get to color, because guess what happens in the midtone?
Texture.
It's
What
what?
did you say?
Yeah, everything. Texture,
Oh, text.
color.
Is
It's
in the
what-
midtone?
it's in the midtones because right here, can you guys see how that's the most intense? That's the actual local color of this object. See this highlight sort of blowing out the orange? This is definitely not orange, it's darker. But can you see how that midtone is really pure orange? And that's where it happens. That's that the midtones become so important. And even here on the apple, see in the midtones here, up here where the highlight areas are, it gets kind of blown out by the light. That's where the real beautiful local color of color is. And when you understand that, but now we're looking at the value. I can see there's a value shift between here and here and here. And it's subtle, but it helps to turn the form. Matter of fact, I like that so much. I covered a little bit of that. I want to bring it back to what was underneath it. I'm going to wipe away that light area right here and bring it back to my base. And I love that halftone right there. It's beautiful. Love halftones. That's where it all happens. So you can see how it's turning, right? We can make a little bit of a... Let's get the highlight back here on the apple. And place your highlights. Try to place your highlights where they are. There's a tiny bit of one right there. And now I'm going to adjust the light areas of the apple. And remember, the light side of the apple isn't that much different than the dark. And it's going to be lighter or darker than this light area. This light area is this light area of the apple lighter or darker than this light area? It's darker. So even though it's a light area, don't get confused that it's always a light. It might be darker compared to something else. That's why it's always relative. So this is a little lighter, but not by a whole lot. This is catching some light up here. This is catching some light, and this is where it's really going to start turning form. There's a little bit of a highlight there. This is kind of near where I'm getting close near to the end, and I'm seeing some more. And over here, it's a little bit lighter. You can see how that's starting to turn form. And then this is a little, because of these little bumps, it's a little darker back here. This is a little lighter. But this is again not that light. I don't know if the camera's picking this up, but it's just really subtle. And this light drops down here a little bit. Fingers are always good. So you can see how that's very subtle from light to dark. And then I can get into some of the darker shadows. I'm going to go behind it and get that shadow color behind it. And I'm going to sort of shape this. Remember this, you can go behind objects to shape things. I feel like you always have to draw on the actual object. It has to be cut away a little bit. I got to get enough paint on here. Sometimes you just got to really get some paint. How many of you found out that when you just get a little more paint on, it's actually sort of helpful? Sometimes when I'll show you a little trick. Sometimes when maybe I don't get enough paint with the brush, I'll take my palette and I'll take my knife and I'll cut into the paint. And then I'll come up here and I'll cut it in there like that. So you can sort of use your palette knife. We're going to actually do a palette knife painting a little later, but that's kind of a nice tool. See, I really like that. That shaped my apple a little bit more. It kept the value, what's going on back there. Come on, Edward Scissorhands. All your stuff going here. So we can shape this a little bit more and make these a little... Sometimes when I want to make a straight line, I like to pull it. I kind of have a better time pulling it this way. Everybody has sort of a different way, but for me, I like to pull it like this. So even if you had something that was going this direction that was a straight line, and you can try it this way. For me, I feel a little more steady. Sometimes you can turn your painting. Well, I got tape on it, but you can turn it like that, and then you can sort of pull straight edges. You could try it. You can just experiment a little bit. This here needs a little bit switch with the value that we see here, and that kind of shapes the apple, and that gives, so this value, I can tell what this value is because it's bumping up against the apple here, and it goes around, and I can shape. I'm doing two things here. I'm getting the value back, plus I'm shaping now. Now I'm sort of drawing. Ironically, now I'm drawing when I'm sort of scrubbing my paintbrush. I'm not going like this and like this. See how I'm kind of sneaking up into it and cutting into it? That's one thing you can think about when you do that. I like to think of painting this like sculpture. All right. Do you guys have any questions? If I were to keep going with this, I would just clean up some things and clean up some of these edges. I could keep doing this. I would clean up some of these edges here. Clean up some of these edges. I would probably find some of the darks and lights and make little darker areas or accents and little lighter areas. Here I can shape this. Now with my smaller brushes, I can clean up these edges. One thing I'll tell all of you now, because this hexagon thing might give a few of you a little bit of a headache, but
I can see that.
but from where all of you are sitting, I want you to notice the distance between here and here. And what's the tendency? Now, if I know sort of in my left brain, I know that that's kind of an actual like stop sign looking shape up there. It's kind of round, right? But from where I'm sitting here, remember, in perspective, what I see is usually different than what I know. What do I know? I know that that's a kind of a round hexagon stop sign shape, right? So what I see is not round. It's like this very narrow thing. So be careful not to do this when you're doing it from this. You understand? Just like your cast shadows. Because then it will look like it's coming at me. So really, and that's something you can measure too. I can measure that and use your measuring tool now where you hold your brush out and say, well, how many of that top goes into the width? I probably wouldn't do it the whole length because that's just too long. But I go, how many of that top goes 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh, I need like at least 4 or 5 of those, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, and a little more. Then you can really overcome your symbolic thinking or in that left brain. That's what that measuring really helps. All right. So you guys have any questions? So that's what we're after, and again, that's kind of the sort of what we're after. This is the one that I had done earlier. Getting the values of the colored objects accurate. Okay. Good job, everyone.
That's a big assignment.
You can do it. You've got 3 hours now, so you've got more time than you've had in your classroom.